Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of Wizards, the podcast guide to comics. I'm Adam.
And I'm Michael.
And back in July of 2022, we lost a very special individual who was responsible for shaping Wizard and Toy Fair into the outrageous, inviting, informative, and entertaining publications that fans of comics and toys and pop culture in general just couldn't get enough of. That man was Pat McCallum. There were many tributes to Pat on various comic book websites, and especially on the Mommy's Busy blog, run by former Wizard staffer Andrew Carden, which we encourage you to read. It was actually titled The Pat McCallum You Never Knew. But tonight with us are some people who did know him well. Joining us are friends and colleagues of Pat who are prepared to share their memories of this creative force whom we all lost too soon. Our hope tonight is that we'll get to know Pat the human being, as well as the gregarious voice of Wizard Magazine and all the joy and fun that he brought to people's lives. So allow me to first introduce our panel here. Joining us, we have Brian Cunningham. We have Doug Goldstein. We have Mike Fasolo. And Steve Blackwell. And so let me ask you this, guys. When you think back to your first days getting to know Pat, what was your first introduction to or impression of Pat McCallum? And let me ask Doug and Brian, because you guys also knew him back in the day when he was running a comic book store for the Seamus family. So what do you recall about early days of knowing Pat?
Well, I'll go first because I think chronologically I met him before Brian. I knew him before the comic book store. I was working at a Ponderosa steakhouse, which was my teenage job. And I knew his older brother, David, who was working there first. And this was a restaurant that we just really fooled around and had a good time. It's kind of like the Wizard of Restaurants, except we probably broke health codes. And one day, Pat joined, and I tried to fool around with him as well. And I don't remember how, but I do remember he had a very negative reaction. And I told him, geez, you're not nearly as fun as your brother, which I don't think he liked. But then I tried again, and I ran into the dishwashing room in the back where he was working at the time on the dishwashing machine with a full crock pot of water, ready to douse him with it. It's a massive dishwashing machine that you would push racks of dishes through and they get cleaned in like 2 seconds. But the racks were these big plastic mesh trays. So when I threw the water up in the air, he grabbed one of these trays to defend himself. But since it's mesh, the water just went straight through it and completely soaked him, head to toe. And we looked at each other and we just fucking lost it. Excuse me. We freaking lost it laughing because the situation.
Don't worry about it. If you curse, it's okay. It's no big deal.
Right, well, fuck it then. Fuck
Good. All right. At least somebody broke the ice before me. Fantastic.
And so that was really Pat. Pat was in the center of a lot of fun insults, none of which mattered because we were all friends and the insults were funny. So you could do terrible things to each other, but it was all in fun and there was never any meanness to anything.
That's awesome. Wow. Brian, how about you?
Well, the first time I encountered Pat, I didn't realize it because on a Halloween, it was Halloween night, 1987, 87 or 80. Yeah, it was 87. And a bunch of us got dressed up in costume. I went as Dead Robin because Robin had just died. And we went to the local comic book store. And and we brought a video camera. One of us had a video camera. So we're taping our, we wanted to, I guess whoever brought it wanted to see the reaction of the store owners and whatnot. So, it was silly. And then, I would say years later, we watched that videotape. And in the background, Pat was playing a video game while we were, walking around the store in our costumes. So I didn't even know at the time that the guy playing the video game with an army jacket and long hair was Pat, because he, it was kind of weird, but yeah, it was strange. But otherwise, I met him at the store. I had heard from a friend of mine, hey, there's this new store. It's even better than this other store. You should check it out. So I did, and that's where I officially met Pat, and we hit it off. I mean, he had similar tastes that I had. He would he would turn me on to these comics that I would not have otherwise have checked out. And like for some reason, the one that comes to mind is Dark Horse put out a comic book sequel to John Carpenter's The Thing. It was called they couldn't call it The Thing because Marvel trademarked The Thing as a title, but they called it The Thing from Another World. And it basically picked up right at the end of John Carpenter's The Thing, and basically continued that story in comic book form, and it was super fun. And from that moment on, I knew, Pat and I were kind of copacetic in taste, and pretty much anything he recommended to me, I would at least give a try.
Wow. Okay. Very nice. Very nice. Who wants to go next? Mike?
Well, I think sequentially, then it's me.
Oh, yeah.
That would be Steve.
So 1993, I joined Wizard the second week of October. So now here we are coming up on Halloween, and I'm just kind of getting to know the lay of the land. You'd been there just a couple weeks, and at this point I was predominantly either helping Doug out on some special projects or working on a sports card magazine we did at the time, Sports Look. And we had this big bullpen office where most of the editorial staff and design staff kind of merged, and it was huge. There was probably about 12, between, I guess, 9 and 12 people in there at any given time. And all of a sudden, there's this crazy noise and racket as this giant gorilla comes running through the place, throwing candy at everybody, and just jumping up and down like a gorilla, and everyone's kind of thinks that's funny. And then the gorilla noises started to change, and they started to become more human and more pained, and it became screams of pain as he's running through the building trying to find his way back to Brian in his office. He throws himself in there and finally manages to pull off the mask, and that's when he discovered he had an allergy to latex. So his entire face was on fire.
Wow.
So it made for a very exciting first real moment with him.
Wow, that's amazing.
I thought you were going to tell the story, Steve, about.
Well, I figure we get there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we'll get there.
About the other gorilla?
Well, no. There's another time he just burst into the big bullpen room.
Yeah. All right. I'll set you that one up. All right. So, maybe a year later, before we moved to the new building, there was a communal printer in that same bullpen room, and he comes walking down the office, out of his office, down the hall to the room, waiting for his printout, and he's just standing there, and he's like, and all of a sudden he looks around the room and he catches people's eye and gets this smile on his face, and he's just like, and he puts his arm in the air and a leg in the air and just goes and lets his giant fart. Tremendous. And he didn't know that behind him had walked in the new marketing girl, this cute little girl. and he's he's so proud of himself. He's like, yeah. And he doesn't realize that we're laughing for a completely different reason than he expected. So he's standing there all proud, and then all of a sudden he goes, turns bright red, and just walked out. That was it.
That is wild. Wow. All right, Mike.
Well, I can tell a story that it wasn't the first time I met Pat, but it was couple weeks later when we were having one of our Wizard wrestling matches. We used to play on the N64, one of those crazy wrestling games. And I was on a team with another one of the employees, Glenn Hurdley. or no, Glenn Hurling, Glenn Portman. And I think we were the champions, and we were challenging Pat and somebody else for the title that night. And he pulled me aside and he goes, I got an idea. He goes, how would you like it if you abandoned Glenn and started to team up with us? And I was like, sure, why not? So we're playing this match, and it's going back and forth. And finally, Glenn and I we're just about to beat it. And of course, I run out of the ring and I grab a chair and I jump back in and I just start wailing away on Glenn's character. And he's going crazy. And he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm on the other team now. So the three of us, Pat, and I forget who he was teamed with, we just started wailing away on Glenn's character and we pinned him. And that was it. And Glenn was very, very upset with me for quite some time over that.
Oh, no.
But it was great because we had Pat was overjoyed that we could do that. There was a huge explosion in the office, and it was just great. Everybody had a great time except Glenn, who was sad. And
That is awesome.
That wrestling game.
that was all Pat. Yeah,
it was so addictive and like in fact.
I still have it. Nice.
So we went so far as to track down the Japanese imports and get the adapter for it, because the Japanese imports were always like one step ahead and they were way more kind of customizable. And he made belts for every weight class, and he would set tournaments up like a couple times a year. And every we played every night, but Monday was like the special night, and there would be the times where he would do these envelope matches, and it would be random. People would just get pulled into an envelope match, and if they won, he literally would hand them an envelope with like $200 in cash in it.
Whoa!
His own money.
Yeah,
I'm like, what are you doing?
that's right. Those were good times.
That was something I was going to ask you guys about, because obviously we know that Pat was just a big wrestling mark, as they say. He's a huge fan of wrestling. Is there like a Pat the pro wrestling fanboy story that sticks out to you the most, aside from the video game?
I don't know about that as much as it was stories like we're talking about here, where he's talking about introducing wrestling into the actual, like making the game feel more real. Like he challenged fans at Wizard World Chicago, and it was me and him because we were the undefeated champions. And he starts to try and like he basically said nobody can beat us. And then we start to wrestle, and he starts to fool around, and I'm looking at him like, we can't lose. He's like, oh, come on, it'll be fun. I'm like, no.
Now, on the gaming side too, because we know that Pat was a big gamer, was there because you guys at different times would have like arcade cabinets in the office and things like that? Like, was there any particular game that he was the most fond of, or that you guys just remember a story around?
Halo.
Yeah, there was maybe for like a year.
Halo.
Every day after work, we would all run into his office. He had Halo set up with 4 controllers back in the days when you played multiplayer on the same screen. And we played until...
and we got the second Xbox in Toy Fair. And
right.
Able to connect them. So we had 4-on-4 going every day after work.
I don't know if I'm wrong when I say a year. It felt like
at least a year.
Forever.
Yeah. It got to the point where you even challenged Michael Turner, Pat and Michael Turner 1-on-1.
Yeah.
Pat beat him.
For the record.
That's wild. Okay. Now, I also, obviously, we know that, a lot of the humor that was featured in Wizard and Toy Fair, and, just in the Wizard Press publications, came from Pat. Everything was passing through him, and he'd add a little shine on there a lot of times. So can you guys define a Pat style joke, or can you think of was there a certain joke that he just repeated all the time? Not punchline joke necessarily, but just Pat style of humor. When you think of it, what is the epitome of that?
Did he start I like pie?
He might have been.
The Frank
For
Miller
absolutely
balloon.
no reason whatsoever, in the early days, there would be a word balloon on some random character, and he's just saying, "I like pie," for
That
no
was,
reason. And then suddenly that just kept
was a running
showing up
gag.
everywhere.
I think the first time he did that was Frank Miller. It was a Frank Miller word balloon that just said, I like pie. I thought that was you, Doug. Was that not
Was
you?
it me?
I thought that was your balloon. I can't
Oh,
remember.
you know, it was really funny, so that must have been me.
Had to be Doug. Had to be.
I'll take it.
But like, was Pat like, like a physical type of humor, like where you get? I'm not that he's giving you noogies, but did he like to like tackle people, or was he more like quick-witted
not like
stuff?
that,
Or
but
no?
practical jokes, and he was in a really annoying way a humor perfectionist. As the guy who has to get these pages out the door, TTT was the biggest nightmare every time, because he would end up rewriting that thing 400 times until literally it was the day before it had to go to press, and he's still making changes because it had to be perfect.
You're
So to
talking
him,
Twisted
like-
Toy Fair Theater, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that was like the one he wanted to get just right every time. Okay. I know we've talked about a lot of the practical jokes on the Wizard Files, as we've had everybody on individually to share various jokes, and most of them revolved around Pat. But do you guys have one that is like personally to you that you recall, like, again, Pat being so proud of himself, or like a certain Pat reaction, to whether it was on him sometimes? I have to assume he got it back every once in a while.
No,
Never? You didn't
no,
dare?
no, because here's the thing. He had the creativity, the money, and the time to go nuclear against anybody who did something to him. Am I wrong?
No, he had a passion for it.
It was what he lived for. So I think my favorite was the body off the roof. You guys know that story?
We've heard many angles, Steve, but we have not heard yours. So why
All
don't
right,
you tell us your
here's-
recollection?
So me and Senreich were in on it. So Senreich is across the table from me. Now, the design and editorial staff usually stayed at the window end of the table. We wanted to be far away from management as possible. And Senreich is across from me towards the end of the table, and he had the walkie-talkie in his pocket. So the signal was going to be, he clicks the walkie-talkie, and that was the signal for the guys on the roof to dump the dummy off the roof outside the window, because the whole point of this practical joke was to screw with management. He wanted to completely make them freak the hell out. So Matt does the thing, the body goes off. Matt and I don't move. There's 3 people who did not react in that entire room at the time. It was me, Matt, and Joe Yanarella. Didn't react at all. Everybody else is up, screaming, running for the windows. They're freaking out. Everyone's like, "Oh my God." And then they finally see it was a dummy. And like, then it becomes, everybody starts laughing. And I'm looking at Joe and I'm like, "Were you in on it?" He goes, "No, I just don't give enough. I don't give enough shit about anybody in this building to have reacted."
All right. Wow. Yeah. That is the classic. That feels like that was the pinnacle of how far can you take
Pretty
a practical joke? That's great. Now the other question that I had was, just kind of getting back to the world of comics. Obviously, Brian, you were saying that Pat had recommended certain comics to you when that was his job, but is there a particular creator or a particular book that you guys recall that Pat was like the biggest cheerleader for, whether it was a new thing happening during the era of Wizard, or just in general, he would always point to, "This is how you do it. This is my guy," or "This is my book. I have all the issues."
I can tell you right now, Brian, do you have yours?
I mean, to me, we always talked about Roger Stern and John Romita Jr., Amazing Spider-Man, and we always talked about John Byrne, Fantastic Four.
Yep, those are it right there.
And Walt Simonson, Thor. Those kind of the trinity of Pat's comic book love.
Okay. Did he get to, because, obviously there were a lot of interviews happening, there were a lot of events and conventions and all those things. Do you guys recall a time where he got to meet these creators, or he specifically made an effort to reach out to someone he admired? Like, was he one to get excited?
That's not
No.
Pat.
He was
No,
not a spotlight guy. He was not even on the stage as far as he was concerned. He, I think, as much as he wanted everyone to have a good time and would elevate the amusement factor of any situation, he didn't have it centered around him in that way. He wasn't trying to be the big man on campus, to use a 60-year-old term.
Yeah, no, you're right.
He just wanted everyone else to be happy. He wasn't eager. He didn't have any agenda for himself.
There was
He
no
wasn't-
ego about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he wasn't running Wizard to be like, yeah, I can meet all these people and I can do all this stuff. He's just having fun. So he always just stepped back and let other people meet everybody.
And a lot of times, if he found out somebody on staff was a big fan, he would arrange it so they would get to do it.
Right.
Oh, that's awesome. You love to hear that.
Like I just want to say, a lot of people probably met him at the conventions without realizing who he was. But at Wizard World, he didn't do panels, he didn't do interviews, he didn't, do anything special. But he created the Wizard Wheel of Doom that fans would play with him at the booth and just have a great time, because there's a trivia thing that if you didn't know the answer, he would give you a physical challenge. He was the life of the party in that very specific, we're all fans together kind of a way.
And that was it. Like for him, it was about really fanning the flames of that fandom and getting people excited. Nobody could generate excitement about even the most banal idea than Pat. Pat can tell a story about something and get a whole room fired up to be like, yeah, because of how he could just stimulate that excitement in it.
Yeah.
He also would walk around the convention dressed as Galactus and interact with fans. Like they wouldn't know it was Pat. It was just, hey, it's Galactus, who's a little going a little blue, but he would have a blast in his anonymity playing this world devourer.
And to be frank, he would hate that we're doing this.
Yes,
He absolutely would hate it.
But like, emotionally picture this. There was one time we were doing a top 50 aliens list for a sci-fi thing we were doing. And he was like, oh, put Galactus high in that list. And I started to argue with him, saying, this is not a comic book magazine in this case. This is a sci-fi magazine. And I got to tell you, from a sci-fi point of view, Galactus is a little goofy. And the look he gave me, the offense, the hurt that I would think of such a thing. I mean, these characters meant everything to all of us, but to him, that was not a joke. That list did not turn out well, because he would not see the sci-fi.
He didn't take Galactus.
Long story.
Is that from Sci-Fi Invasion, Doug?
That was Sci-Fi Invasion.
Oh,
Yes.
One of our least popular magazines.
Now, how many of you guys got to live with Pat? That's the question.
everybody
yeah.
but me.
Yeah. So what was Pat like as a roommate? You go to work, he's the boss, and then you come home and he's your roommate. So how did that work out for you?
I thought it was pretty good. It was Pat was always, no matter whether he was at work or whether at home, he was still always, wanting to do something that was exciting. And if we weren't playing, wrestling as soon as you got home and, had your dinner or whatever, then it was Mario Kart or some other, watching some crazy movie with him. It was always centered around him, even though, it wasn't focused on him. It was about him showing you, having a great time, just having a good time with everything.
Yeah, he had people over to watch wrestling, every whatever night it was on.
Monday.
I mean, and at the time there was both WWE and WCW, so there were a bunch of different nights where he would have people over just to watch that.
Pat never
Monday,
turned.
Brian.
Pat never turned Pat off. Like
Yeah.
there was never a time where he would like grab a beer, lean back, and watch a game. You know, it's like that. He was always projecting his Patness. There were my favorite memory of a late night video game is he and two of our friends at the time were over playing the Turbo Graphics, if you remember that system, wrestling game I can't remember, but this game had a slight flaw where if you picked up a wrestler and threw him, another wrestler could catch him and throw him back, and the guy being thrown couldn't do anything about it. There was no way to stop that from happening. And Pat and our friend Vito started doing that against our friend Richie, and did not stop until, no matter how much Rich complained, it maybe a half hour later, Rich just left. And that is the funny stuff that he's always doing.
That's awesome. Wow. Now, obviously, at your pad there, you guys threw a lot of parties as well. I mean, it just felt like there was always an event that we, the readers, were hearing about in the pages of Wizard Magazine in the bullpen section. So is there a Pat the Party Animal story, or just a favorite moment that he created at one of the parties that you guys
Halloween
enjoy?
parties were always the hit.
Yeah, the costumes.
Yeah, Pat swung for the fences on everything. I mean, the first Halloween party we had was a big deal, and when we got to the second Halloween party, he felt we needed to up the ante. So, or actually, I guess it was technically the third, because the first one was when you and Pat were living together, Doug, at Lake Lucille.
Yeah.
So I guess technically this was the third Halloween party. But I mean, we had one of the designers who worked with Steve's, Cindy Emmert. She was a tarot card reader. So I mean, we asked her if she wanted to read the tarot cards at the party, and she agreed. And like that was probably one of the most popular things at the party. Everybody wanted their tarot cards read.
Well, that and wasn't that the same year Stewart was Hellboy?
Yes, Stuart Morales painted himself completely red to be Hellboy, and he took spray paint caps and put them on his forehead with a rubber band, and
The worst part about it was he was covered in red paint and the couches were white.
Everywhere he went, we knew exactly where we could mark it. It was like a family circus trail. We could watch him. We could see exactly where he went throughout the entire night. Oh man, it was crazy.
That's from that night.
Yeah, that was it was also bobbing for stuff, where we had a giant Rubbermaid tote filled with Ecto Cooler. We just dumped in. I think Pat must have bought probably like a dozen jugs full of Kool-Aid Ecto Cooler. And he just threw a bunch of candy and stuff in there. And Donato, who worked in the warehouse, he was intent on winning. He was going to win no matter what, and he just dove headfirst into this big giant thing of Ecto Cooler. Went all over the place. All that floor was sticky for years to come. Oh man, that was a night. That was a night. Yeah.
Now, Mike, I think we've heard this story before, but you told us you were teasing earlier the gorilla story, which I believe that took place on the premises, right?
Yeah.
So what was that about? Tell us that one.
Well, that was when we were all living in the Franklin Lane house. It was me, Pat, Brian. Were you there? I don't know if you were there at the time.
Which one?
For the big gorilla.
Oh, I was there.
Right. So it was, Brian was there, but Andrew and Pat had worked out this little system that they were going to pull a nice little practical joke on me. So it was just when I forget which comet was going over, and Andrew's like, "Hey, you can really see it out in the backyard. I'll meet you out there, and we're going to take some pictures." But I was like, "Okay." Now our backyard back then was just this huge expanse of land, pitch black, couldn't see anything. So I go out there, I'm wandering around, waiting for, see if something goes streaking over. And often kind of off toward the fence, I hear this. And I was like, oh, okay, that's a little strange. And then hear it again. And I'm like, okay, no, I'm getting a little worried. There's something else out here. And then out of nowhere, this thing just comes charging at me. I go flipping out. I spin around. I go running back into the house. I'm sliding on leaves. I'm crashing into tables. Dive into the house, nearly having a heart attack. And Pat comes running into the house after me, dressed in the gorilla suit. And he and Andrew are in hysterics. They thought this was the funniest thing. I'm dying on the ground, thinking I'm going to have a heart attack. And they are just in hysterics over this whole thing. And that was Pat. He would go to any lengths to pull one over on you. And yeah, that one spread around the office quite quickly. And the gorilla story became legendary.
That's awesome. Now, I just as we're trying to get to know Pat a little bit better as well here, if you were walking by his room, he's driving to work, you go by his office, like, was there a band that he like, like Andrew Carden loved his Twisted Sister, right? Is there a band or music that you associate with Pat, or was that not his thing?
I think the only band that stands out to me that he would respect and listen were the
like the Ozzy.
Yeah, he liked Ozzy.
I was gonna say, like, who the hell did Wayward Son?
Kansas.
Yeah, he loved that song. And he like Groove Is in the Heart by whatever the hell. It was so goofy.
I remember he liked that I'm Blue Bada B song. He used to play that all the time.
He liked weird stuff.
You guys kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier up top, but we've heard in the past that Pat really did his best to help out people in the office when needed, just to do what he could do in any way. Do you guys have a story about him helping somebody else, or can you think of something that Pat really did for you that helped you in your life, or just at that time in your life?
But that's the thing, is it's not like it ever stopped. Just he and I'd go to lunch every day, and just the most basic stuff, like, oh, we're on deadline. When we're done eating, we'll stop at the Rocky Mountain Chocolate Factory, and he'll drop like $100 on chocolate and bring it back, put it on the water cooler for everybody. Stuff like that. Like, that was just what he would do. Like, all the art, there's these giant Alex Ross DC posters from back in the day. He would just, when new ones would come out, oh, the office needs to look nice. People need to feel good about where they work. So you take the money out of his pocket. We'd bring the things to the frame shop during lunch, pick them up later in the week, and then we'd come and hang them. So, between me and him, we hung almost all that stuff that was in the lobby and all down the hallways. And it all came out of his pocket. That wasn't something Seamus would, they wouldn't put a premium on that. That's Pat.
Some editor at DC Comics posted a story, and Brian, please take over if you're aware of the story, where they were admiring a certain statue in his DC Comics office when he was working there. And Pat said, "You really like that statue?" And they're like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Okay, it's yours." And the guy was like, "What the hell are you talking about? It's mine. It's a statue that's in your office." And Pat was like, "Yeah, but you love it, so it's yours." And that is just, everything we're saying. He just wanted people to be excited and happy about this stuff.
And especially because he knew, a lot of times their working conditions could be challenging. So he felt like it was the least he could do to make people feel good about where they work. Because people to this day at DC still loved the fact that every week he brought donuts to everybody. Every floor of the building. Every DC floor he brought donuts to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and speaking of which, I wanted to ask Brian, for those who don't know, I mean, obviously all of you are aware of it, but like, for those who aren't aware of Pat's post-Wizard career at DC Comics, can you kind of explain the types of projects he had a hand in, what he influenced, and what he was involved in there?
Yeah, sure. When DC was about to embark on the New 52 relaunch, Pat was hired not long before that, probably a few months, because we needed an on-ramp to get there. But Pat was Pat shepherded the Aquaman launch with Jeff Johns and Ivan Rice and Joe Prado and Rod Reese. Basically, he championed that script. Management was not in love with that first script. So he went to bat for Jeff and the team to not dismiss it. And basically what you read in Aquaman #1 is that direction. So and it turned out to be among the most popular launches of the New 52. Another launch that he was heavily involved with was Adam Glass's run on Suicide Squad. Adam wanted to include Harley Quinn on the team, and Pat championed that as well. So management may have been more on board with that, but either way, Pat was the one who was the first person to say, yes, that's a great idea, I'm going to take this and let's see what we can do with it. So Harley Quinn being on the Suicide Squad and being in the movies, it may never have happened if Pat had squashed it from the get-go and said to Adam, nah, I don't think so. But he saw a good idea. He knew a good idea when he saw it. So those two stand out. And he championed a lot of things along the way. Some of which didn't work out, but some of them did, like Deceased. Deceased was Ben Abernathy before he joined editorial. I should say rejoined editorial. He was working at Talent Relations at the time, but he wanted to do this series, and Pat recognized that this could be fun. So a lot of fun things didn't happen a lot. When things just fell by the wayside for whatever reason. But for this one, Pat really went to bat for it, and it turned out to be a good thing. People like it. It's had many sequels.
It's my favorite DC book by far. Like, it is the best one right now. I love that story.
Yeah, and Ben Abernathy brought that forth, and that book kind of paved the way for Ben to rejoin editorial as the Batman Group editor. But Deceased was something that Pat and Ben kind of tag teamed on to get that going, and it was DC was the better for it.
Yeah, and like you guys said, Pat didn't like the spotlight. He wasn't going to tell everybody about all his accomplishments. I'm curious for you, is there a talent of Pat's or something he contributed to just in the world of comics through Wizard, through whatever medium he had, that you guys recognize and say, I don't think most people know about this, or more people should know about this?
Well, I think it comes down to what drove him. What drove him was when he would see something, he could inherently see how to make it better. And he wanted to make it better. And that goes for everything. Like, the initial idea for Wizard was that black and white price listing. Okay, that would have been fine for, one store to put out for its customers, but he saw something better. And this extended to everything he ever did. Our wrestling league, like, he made belts, he made a thing of it, the foosball. He bought a giant 4-foot trophy and would put a tournament together and emblazon people's teams' names on it. Things like playing HeroClix. HeroClix, he couldn't leave it at 2 dimensions. He built cities that had breakable walls and floors and subways, and everything he took to that next level and made it better. And it's the same thing when it came to storytelling, same thing when it came to TTT, same thing, anything creative he put his hand on, he wanted to make it the best it could be.
He also was very into what's right and wrong about the quality of the industry. And if something disrespected comics, and I don't know if that's the right word, but he was very much behind the entire Wizard campaign to trash the Spider clone saga. Sometimes the magazine took a stand on some things, And sometimes the comic book companies didn't appreciate a thumbs down. That, and you know, it's never like we had a big article saying things like "Spider clone, what a piece of crap." But you know, whenever Spider-Man was there, he would have a word balloon saying, "Ah, you can clone my ass," or you know, whatever the fuck it was. Because what they did in that storyline really was not okay to Pat or to any sensible comic book fan, really. I remember even a time where there was a comic book that he didn't think should have been successful, but it ended up on like the top 10 hottest comics list. And when he wrote the write-up for that, he said, how do you become successful? I guess you do this, you do a Wizard 1/2 issue, which was our exclusive comics, and blah, you end up on the Wizard top 10.
Yeah, that was Gen 13, Doug, and Michael Turner, or not Michael. Yeah, it was Gen 13, and J. Scott Campbell then wrote in the letters column of Gen 13 a rebuttal to everything Pat had said, and he like chewed out Wizard. It was crazy.
But that caused quite the scene internally, because what do you do criticizing your own projects? But that Pat was like, it's true, I feel this way. And he was not a political person. He wasn't like, you're right, I should stomp that out because it's not good. He didn't think that way.
Everything is everything, Doug.
Yeah, I think the politics of the business, because as Wizard grew in success, the politics of the business got a little messier, and Wizard became more entwined on the business end, you know, because it was all very symbiotic with Wizard, Marvel, DC, Image, Valiant, you know, Topps, you name it. Like all these companies would advertise, they would you know, they would spend money at our conventions. I mean, there was a lot of business aspects that wore on all of us, but I don't think it wore on anyone as much as Pat, who is the opposite of compromise in terms of, you know, if there's a compromise, if there's a compromise for the wrong
never
reasons,
be your integrity, and
Yeah.
that was the thing. There was too many people willing to compromise in way too many ways that made that just completely were they lacked integrity. I mean, it was just that's the simplest way to put it, and that angered him in a lot of ways, and I think that's ultimately what broke his heart about Wizard, and made him ultimately, you know, pretty much want to leave. Is this because we were held to a different standard than other parts of the business, and we were the ones who actually were the, you know, it was the voice of the business, you know, the people who were in other parts never, like, they didn't speak to the public, they didn't speak. So I think that bothered him a lot.
Well, I also think he was never ever one to take the easy route, you know, because if there was something easy, it wasn't worth doing.
Yeah.
So I mean, and that's where I think a lot of it got a little messy internally, because you know, the easy way became the standard bearer for some of the different divisions, and you know, it was.
I also think, well, honestly, he wanted to be like, he always wanted to be the voice of fandom, right? Because he was a fan.
Right.
And I think once we got to a certain point as a company, he felt like we could no longer be critical when we should be, because we were being told that that's bad for business. And for him, he goes, like, he would look at it and say, yeah, but we're here for the consumer. Yeah, and it was trying to rectify those kind of areas, I think, that really were hard.
One of the biggest conflicts I remember was that Toy Fair magazine had a joke. I think it was Toy Fair magazine had a joke in one of its Twisted Toy Fair theaters that some mother somewhere got very offended by, wrote Walmart that she didn't appreciate it, and Toy Fair was taken out of Walmart. And the sales team at Wizard Entertainment lost their minds. And for a short while, the sales team were allowed to first see the humor stuff before it went out. that caused fights like you've never seen. And to his credit, Fred Pierce, the guy that was basically, you know, the Dick Cheney of Wizard, he sided with us. I mean, after that first kerfuffle with that one joke, every time the sales team was like, they can't say this, and we were all, you know, Pat was like, it's not offensive, it's funny. Fred agreed with us to the point where the sales department gave up. And that's to Pat's credit. Like, that, don't tell him he can't be funny. I mean, holy cow.
I mean, that was the whole reason anybody ever bought the magazine.
It's true. Yeah. I mean, definitely, I know I can speak from personal experience. If there had been no humor in Wizard, and especially, you know, the humor that appealed to me at that age, you know, I definitely
Well,
would have
and that
stuck
was the
with
thing
it.
too. Like, everywhere he could put something, he wanted something in there. Like, even, I don't know if you paid attention to things like the fine print and contest you guys have mentioned before, but even in the masthead, there was always running gags, even in the masthead and in the indicia. There was always something hidden in there. So if somebody took the time to read it, they got their money's worth.
Well, that got us in trouble though. That got us in trouble once. I'm trying to remember. Doug, were you involved in this?
Was that
when
the contest
we were doing
one?
the ingredients of spam? we wrote that there's rat hair in spam, and believe it or not, the lawyers from Hormel were not pleased.
That wasn't me.
We had to run a retraction on that one.
Doug, wasn't me.
I want to point, I just have to share this. I remembered one of the biggest arguments about that humor thing that we had with the sales department. There was a Twisted Toy Fair theater where the X-Men go back in time and everybody had like a golf ball afro. And so then, but at the end, we're forward in time again, and Professor X is like, oh, that's right, I'm bald. And then he shoots himself in the head because he's so upset he's bald. And the sales team is like, you can't tell bald people they should kill themselves. And Pat couldn't function because how do you respond to that?
God.
Awesome.
Now, I have to ask you guys, so, you know, we talked about the stuff he'd get passionate about, the stuff, you know, that he would butt heads about. But if you were picturing Pat in like his happiest moment, whether it was something you actually witnessed and you could think back, just the smile on his face at this time, or you could just imagine putting him in the scenario that you think would make him just the happiest, but what would that be? What would he be doing?
For me, it's always involving him laughing at another mutual friend's expense. Just somebody doing something absurd and just Pat reveling in that absurdity.
Pat would take great pleasure in taking a dry erase marker, go to a dry erase board, and draw a caricature of Doug fully naked, completely naked, except for a very tiny fig leaf covering up the naughty bits. And then he'd give him a word balloon, and he would be like, meh. And for some reason, he would do that all the time. And both of us would, Doug would be in the room, it would be the three of us, and we would lose it. Except for Doug, who was struggling not to laugh. But
I didn't appreciate.
By the way, that meh is one of my favorite Wizard sound effects.
What was it he did with one of your new notebooks, Brian?
Oh yeah, for a birthday gift, he bought me a blank notebook, which actually, I'll share it in a moment. But he I don't know, let's say it was 100-page blank notebook. On like page 90, in the center of the page, very tiny, he wrote Kako. I have that somewhere.
But how long did it take for you to discover that?
What, his
sure
Kako?
that I looked for it.
He also used to do things like if he saw an action figure that he thought looked like somebody, he would customize it. So like he took this Predator figure and he put a scar on his chin and put a Yukon sweatshirt on him, and that he gave it to me.
Custom Blackwell. That's nice. Did that ever appear in Twisted Toy Fair Theater in the
No,
background?
no.
No. Oh, Brian, tell us what we're seeing.
Taco.
This is the Notebook.
So you got Brian, talk when you do it, so you show up on the screen large.
Yeah, so just read it out loud to us as you show it to the screen.
It says Kako.
Oh.
And he did something terrible to one of Doug's Spock action figures.
I had so many, I don't remember.
Oh
He-
yeah.
he,
Well,
he
yeah,
took
he
this
changed the-
and turned it to this,
You can't do that.
and you were
You did.
so mad.
I just said you can't do that. Son of a
I'm
bitch.
shocked you don't still have that, Doug.
I
Probably does.
It's probably somewhere hidden in that office.
don't know.
All right. Well, guys, I mean, this has been fantastic, but as we close out here, if there's anything else you feel needs to be said, any other memories that have come to mind, I mean, obviously you've given us an insight that, like you say, Pat probably would never have allowed any of us to know. So we really appreciate you sharing that so we can, really celebrate him all the more. But was there anything else you'd like to leave us with?
I owe him everything. He was just one of the best people I've ever had in my life, and I've never been with somebody whose creativity was so contagious that, like, you literally came away from every interaction on like cloud 9 of creativity with him. I mean, there was just and his generosity of spirit. It was unparalleled, and I miss him a lot.
Yeah, he definitely changed the attitude of everyone around him towards let's have a good time.
Yeah.
And you have to picture a bunch of like-minded nerds working together in their 20s when they don't know what to do with their money. They have more time and energy than they should, and they have nothing holding them down. Like, there's no one saying you got to come home on time. So we all just were inspired by his attitude, and the whole place just became this wonderful madness that without him it would not have been.
No.
And those were easily the best years of I hope my wife isn't here, but it's like the best years of my life. It's just it was
a dream situation.
Yeah.
I don't even want to call it a job. It was a dream situation. Like working with these guys, because every single one of these guys is these are brothers to me. They're not friends, and because of Pat, he brought us together and made us brothers.
Yeah, we didn't realize how good we had it at the
Yeah.
time. It's amazing to me. That whole period. I'll never have anything like that again.
Yeah, and there was nothing we couldn't accomplish. I mean, that was the thing. Somebody threw an idea out, and they're like, "Oh, and we need it done in a week." And it wasn't like we can't do it. It was, all right, roll up your sleeves. Let's come up with some ideas. And we sit there and figure it out and get it done. We did amazing shit on a shoestring budget that, like, if people knew how little we had to work with, I think they would be even more amazed.
Yeah, it's one of those places where you actually enjoy getting up and going to work every day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much again for joining us and sharing those memories of Pat. And we certainly will miss him, and we're grateful that he was here in this world and all that he did bring during his time here. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing.
I want to thank you guys for keeping this stuff alive, man. I really do. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. That's a very nice compliment. I appreciate that.
It really is our pleasure. And
we really enjoy it.
Yeah, it is a tribute to Pat in everything we're doing and what he created and what you guys all created together. We just want to make sure that doesn't get forgotten. So,
you know what it is also? It's sort of like a window into, like, not just our history, but your history as well. And like, the time, at least, especially in the 90s, it's almost like frozen in its own sort of bubble. And all of that stems from you guys and Pat. And it's interesting to see that from a different lens now as, 40-year-olds and looking back at it when we were laughing at it when we were 12-year-olds,
40.
I knew you were gonna laugh. You're like, oh, these jerks are 40 years old. Oh god.
Babies at 40.
Couple of dorks at 40.
I wish.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye, boys.
Bye-bye.
All right, Michael. So, wow, what a special event. What a special person that we got to celebrate. Now, one thing that we've talked about is, you are a part of the show, but you were not as obsessed with Wizard Magazine, reading every inch of it like I was back in the day. And you have told me in the past that Pat McCallum wasn't the first name on the list when you thought of Wizard Magazine, but now we've gone through this. We've been covering the magazine that he was shepherding for all those years. And so what is kind of your takeaway from this event?
So it's a funny thing. So, since you've planned to do this tribute, I was racking my brain a lot because I'm sitting there. I mean, everybody knew who Garrett was, and it was just synonymous with the magazine and so on. But as a kid, I wasn't really fully familiar with all the artists and people involved in comics and Wizard Magazine. But hearing their stories, right, and seeing those stories played out by them, and remembering them from the issues we've covered as well as ones I've read as a kid, I didn't realize how many things that he was involved in that we got to experience. Like, how Twitter has no filter, it's almost like he didn't want to hold anything back, right? He's like, oh, we had all these goofy things happen in the office. I want the world to know this goofiness too. Like, they didn't want to just be, this magazine. They wanted to be themselves as well within that magazine.
Yeah, I mean, it is amazing, again, because that's what we hear time and time again when we have guests on the show. Like, they talk about it was a community, right? Especially for people who were living in small towns and couldn't even get to a comic store. They had to go to the grocery store and grab what they could. Like, he was opening up a whole world, but also doing it in a way that was inviting to everybody, just like all his friends from Wizards just told us. They're like, he made everything better. He made everything special for everybody. And I think the magazine attests to that.
What I also find very interesting is how many people that worked there, he gave a place to live. Could you think of a boss you've ever had in your life that said, hey, oh, you need an apartment here, you can live with me for a little while till you get yourself settled? Like that's unheard of. That's pretty wild. And I wish I got to know him a little bit, and he seems like a pretty special dude. And it's interesting to look at it, like I said, through a different lens now, and just watching these four gentlemen talk to us about him. They got teary-eyed, they laughed. It was, a very rewarding and fulfilling for me as almost like a spectator, because I kind of wanted to sit back and listen to their stories and as opposed to kind of butt in and ask questions. And it was interesting to just feel their emotion in that time,
And as you know, I have no problem butting in, so I was happy to ask the questions. But that's wonderful that you were able to get that takeaway from it. And here's the thing: like they said, there were few moments when people could meet Pat McCallum, but the conventions and the Wheel of Death was one of them. If you had a Pat McCallum interaction at some point, if you remember meeting him, one of the lucky few who got to interact with Galactus at a con or whatever it was, we would love to hear that in the comments below. Or you can always share your stories with us. You can find us on Twitter at Wizards Comics or on Instagram at Wizards_comics. If you even have pictures, you could even just write in a story to wizardscomicspod@gmail.com. We'd love to read it, on a follow-up episode, one of our half episodes maybe. So this was just something that we, like said, it was in the works for a long time. We wanted everybody, to have a moment to to grieve and then to celebrate. And so we're glad that we got to do that for Pat. And we hope that this was something that you all enjoyed. And of course, we will continue to cover Wizard Magazine in all its glory and many of Pat's other projects like Toy Fair. And I mean, he had his hand in all of it. So we're excited to celebrate in that way. But thank you again for joining us. And until next time, keep your books bagged and boarded.